Welcome to episode 47 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. So let's get started with my first topic. This week, AT&T announced plans to bridge the digital divide in the United States. It's a commitment of over $2 million and really involves 3 areas. One, it's investing incrementally in expanding networks in areas that are underserved and underpopulated. It also involves subscriber subsidies. And finally, they are also providing no-cost educational content through its Warner Media division. And so the timing's interesting. You know, we spoke about T-Mobile last week with their hometown experts and heroes programs with grants for small communities and that sort of thing, as well as their fixed wireless access service. I was actually asked to provide a quote, within the AT&T press release, and I think it's a great step in the right direction. So there needs to be, concrete investment in these areas in order to bridge the digital divide. And the benefit for that, it's almost like raising the water level, for the entire country. It's going to drive economic prosperity and improvements in GDP. So I'm wondering what your take is on this latest news from AT&T.
I mean, I think it's a welcome announcement. I think it's important for a lot of reasons, but I also do think that it might be influenced by some of the things that T-Mobile has been doing. And I think it's good if we have operators competing for who will offer the best solution to bridge the digital divide that we have, because
Mm-hmm.
I think it having that kind of a bridge and that kind of a gap sets up big portions of the country to just not be as successful. And we just don't want that. We want everybody to have equal access and equal opportunity. So I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing if the operators are competing with each other to improve access.
Yeah, and I'm interested, US Cellular has not weighed in. They predominantly have a footprint in rural America. So I would expect news from them. And Verizon, we haven't heard from Verizon at all. And, one of the things that Verizon speaks to is just, it's at least in a 4G world, its coverage area and its reliability and that sort of thing. And, obviously, Verizon has some huge gaps to overcome with 5G with respect to expanding their footprint beyond their ultra wideband millimeter wave deployment, and starting to deploy those C-band, kind of upper mid-band spectrum assets, which will take some time as well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Verizon later in the podcast, but it'll be interesting to see how those two operators respond to the T-Mobile AT&T bar being set there for rural America. Let's move into your first topic this week, and you want to talk about Qualcomm and Ericsson and carrier aggregation and MIMO.
Yeah, so these are two different announcements, but they're both fairly technical, smaller announcements in terms of moving forward with 5G connectivity. The
Mm-hmm.
first one is that Qualcomm was able to do some 5G data calls over dual connectivity and standalone, combining millimeter wave with sub-6 spectrum. And this was using their X60 modem. So it's basically actually, this was X65. The X60 is the other modem that was in the other test.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, what it does is that it allows for the FDD and TDD low band to be combined with millimeter wave to improve millimeter wave coverage, improve bandwidth, and utilize millimeter wave for downlink while using midband and low band for uplink.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be something we're going to see a lot of in the future.
Yeah.
But this is something that needs to be proven out. The capability has been there. The X65 is their top end. So we'll see what happens there. But the good thing is that it's going to improve coverage and speeds. And that's going to be a big deal for companies like Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, who are going to be combining multiple 5G bands together. Addition to that, there was an Ericsson announcement around uplink, and that was with the X60 and Ericsson's equipment. They were able to get 315 megabits per second uplink, which is a big deal because that's a lot faster than what we've seen in the past. And with these wider bands, the mid band, this was tested at 3.7, 100 megahertz. You're going to be able to get a lot more uplink out of the mid bands. So that's an added benefit I think a lot of people are maybe not aware of. But what's going to be good is that improving uplink will improve the overall user experience, because a lot of applications like what we're doing today right now with video are very dependent on a stable uplink connection, especially upload speed as we do more videos. So I think showing that there are big improvements to uplink is going to move things a lot forward faster than if we just focus on downlink, which has been a traditional focus for the consumer for the most part. But because people are generating so much user content, uploading so much today, having those faster uplinks actually improves network performance overall, because now you don't have people sitting on the uplink and taking spectrum and capacity while they're waiting for those uploads to happen.
Right. Yeah. And Qualcomm's been doing quite a bit on improving the propagation of millimeter wave, right? And so, this isn't a surprise to me. Qualcomm will be conducting their 5G summit next month, and you and I will be attending that. And I'm sure we'll be sharing our insights on a future podcast as well. But great updates, buddy. Let me move to my second topic this week. And I want to talk about Vodafone. So Vodafone became the first operator in Europe to launch 5G standalone. They've done this in Germany. I'm not surprised when you look at, the German economy and the automobile industrial complex there, and the promise of 5G really to bring, lots of efficiencies from a digitalization perspective into the automobile manufacturing arena. But certainly, Germany is a very technology forward country. Certainly, probably one of the strongest in Europe. So, it kind of begs the question, will, sort of first to standalone for Vodafone give it a competitive advantage, much like T-Mobile in the United States was first to standalone? What's your take on that?
I think being first to standalone is not necessarily that critical. At least we're not seeing the benefits of that today. However, I do believe that having standalone is super important. And I think having it sooner means that you're going to be able to test a lot of these new use cases and enable a lot of these new use cases a lot more quickly. And I think that's something that has been missing from the market, because without standalone, I just don't see a lot of application developers, device makers really wanting to optimize for it specifically.
Yeah.
And that means that you have another chicken and egg problem. So I think every operator needs to have standalone as soon as possible, because I think we need critical mass in terms of deployment to really move things forward, because otherwise people are going to start thinking 5G is stagnating because there aren't, unique killer use cases for 5G. And it's like, well, we can't have killer use cases without standalone.
Till we get there. Yeah. And so my two thoughts are, number one, yeah, so standalone provides the true promise of 5G from a latency and a throughput perspective, marrying that 5G core with 5G radio access. So, potentially that provides, better performance and meets that expectation that consumers have had for 5G. And maybe that helps drive some maybe short-term incremental subscriber adds, and ARPU lift. I think the other opportunity is around network slicing and the monetization. So you really can't, get to network slicing until you get to standalone, right? So that might give Vodafone some first mover advantage with respect to, slicing that public network and being able to monetize that. But you're right. I mean, eventually all carriers will catch up. And time will tell, for example, in the US, if that's really going to enable a competitive advantage with T-Mobile and with Vodafone. But I thought it was interesting news to report on, given that
Definitely.
they are the first to SA in Europe. So let's move to your second topic this week. And you want to talk about Ookla. And it just seems like, almost every month, one carrier is rated the fastest, right? So Ookla had some news to share with respect to T-Mobile, right?
Yeah, so this is a report for Q1, which is different from the reports we saw, which were Q4. That last report basically had all the carriers in a dead heat, with each carrier getting one reporting company to give them, top marks for being the fastest. This time it's Ookla, and they are giving T-Mobile the crown. They say that T-Mobile has a median 5G download speed of 82.35 megabits per second, which beats AT&T's 76.6 and Verizon's 67.2, which makes sense because T-Mobile has been rolling out its mid-band very aggressively nationwide, and that should increase the average, well, in this case, median 5G test result, because there's going to be a lot more results in the 300s, 400s, 500s, thanks to the mid-band. So I expect that this will be a point where T-Mobile will maintain its lead in fastest 5G network for the foreseeable future. I think that we'll probably see Verizon start to catch up to them next year. Even though the Verizon will have mid-band towards the end of this year, I think that rollout is probably not going to be as aggressive as T-Mobile's. So I think it'll probably won't be until Q2 or Q3 of next year until we really see Verizon starting to catch up with T-Mobile. And obviously AT&T is kind of in the same boat. So I think we'll probably get a full year of T-Mobile being the fastest 5G network from here on out. And I think that's going to be probably for the, Ookla report at least. There was a Root Metrics report that did come out earlier in the week.
I was going to mention that, and they spoke to T-Mobile having the best coverage, but that AT&T had the best download speeds and reliability, right? Yeah,
exactly. So this is why we have multiple testing organizations, and that's why we always like to, ensure that we cover all of these announcements, because there are different methodologies. But that said, I think Root Metrics is going to have to eventually give T-Mobile the crown as well, simply because they're going to have mid-band everywhere, and like the math is just going to support that. But reliability is always an interesting discussion, and coverage is, that's already been set, and that's not going to change for a very long time. So it'll be interesting to see how these things develop in the long term. But I think we're going to see AT&T and Verizon especially playing a lot of catch up over the next year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. From a coverage perspective, T-Mobile just has the most complete spectrum footprint. We've talked about that on prior podcasts, but C-band will help close the gap, with AT&T and Verizon. But to your point, that'll take some time for them to deploy that. So good stuff. So let me talk about my third and final topic. And this week, Verizon announced a hyper-precise positioning platform to assist with intelligent driving. So intelligent driving, autonomous driving, I sort of interpret this as the telemetry that's going to be needed to support safe autonomy in the future. It's going to be a combination of different modalities. It's likely going to be very low power, LoRaWAN type, solutions, but it also definitely is going to leverage LTE and 5G. And the big kind of critique that I have with this is that Verizon's 5G network has been very, very initially focused on ultra wideband, which is millimeter wave, which is concentrated in just a few major metro areas. And so and not that 5G is going to support all of the needs for road telemetry, but from my perspective, that's a big gap in my mind, and certainly, a carrier like T-Mobile that's got low, mid, and high band would be better positioned to do that. I think you will hear about in the future about T-Mobile's expansion of their IoT platform. We've spent some time with executives recently. Nothing that we can share right now, but certainly when you look at what Sprint was doing prior to the acquisition with Curiosity in that platform, it was very sort of small to mid-market focused. It'll be interesting to see how T-Mobile again leverages its unique footprint from a spectrum position to support something like Verizon just announced this week. So, any additional thoughts on your part?
Yeah, I feel like some of this IoT play that Verizon is pushing might actually leverage millimeter wave to prove out the, hyper precise location accuracy.
Yeah.
But I feel like that would be very limited, like you said, in terms of footprint. And IoT is not necessarily one of those technologies where having a small footprint is an advantage.
Right.
So I would say that this would absolutely have to be very dependent on coverage. And that's definitely a fair criticism of that because Verizon's going to be, catching up on coverage for a long time. And I think that we have a long road for them to improve that. And I think them acquiring their mid-band for C-band is going to obviously help that a lot. But even their attitude towards that makes me question whether or not they will really have the kind of 5G coverage that people have come to expect from Verizon with what they have with 4G. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. Maybe they're going to flip the switch on their 4G earlier than I think a lot of people expected, and possibly move, their 4G customers to bands that are not as good in terms of coverage. That's obviously not a great look for them, and I'm sure will anger a lot of customers. But they have to figure out this coverage situation somehow, and they seem to be continually putting out these mixed messages about what they're going to do and what they need to do. And I'm not really sure what'll happen there, but ultimately you're right that IoT does need coverage, and it's a very confusing announcement considering the state of their network today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of IoT that can operate very well on an LTE network. And so I'm not saying that 5G is end all be all, but what 5G will do, it'll be able to support the scale of devices from low power to much higher powered type devices that are more video oriented and that sort of thing. So it's sort of an investment protection thing for the long haul. So it'll be interesting to see how it rolls out. Let's move to your third and final topic this week, and the national parks in the United States plan to roll out 5G. It sounds pretty interesting to me. I mean, honestly, like I'm in Colorado this week, thus, the beanie cap I'm wearing. When I get out to Rocky Mountain National Park, I don't necessarily want to get on my smartphone, but would love to hear your insights on what you think, the applications could be here.
Sure. So I am the guy who likes to take his phone with him everywhere he goes, including
I know.
in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
One, to figure out whether there's coverage and what the speeds are like, but also to be able to upload photos and videos.
Right.
And maybe occasionally watch some content. Don't ask. But the reality is there's an ISP called Access Parks who works with the National Park Service, and they are planning to roll out a private 5G network deployment with CBRS spectrum to essentially, one, improve access to coverage and bandwidth in national parks. They've already rolled out 9 locations, including the South Ridge of the Grand Canyon. And the idea is that they are very likely to open their private network to the operators to give them roaming capabilities so that the operators do not need to make the investment or build out the infrastructure and can simply roam on this network and pay them for that roaming data, which is probably a big portion of what their business model will likely be.
Right.
But it's interesting because I do think that there is a big connectivity gap in national parks. And from my experience, there's a good amount of national parks here in San Diego. And every time I go there, coverage is real bad. And it could be better. And I do think that, having a partner that is familiar with the national parks like Access Parks can really work quickly to roll out, spectrum and band and coverage that is needed in the parks that doesn't leave too much of a footprint, right? Because part of the idea of having a national park is to minimize our footprint on nature.
Exactly.
And I think having a really thoughtful deployment from a company that knows what they're doing will benefit everybody, right? Because people will get better coverage, and I think it's a safety thing too. Because if somebody gets hurt, having a phone on you with good coverage means that you can get to somebody quickly. And I'm sure the national parks are absolutely all about having better coverage, because that ultimately will mean that more people will probably come out, and then they can avoid bigger problems in the future with injuries and other kinds of potentially life endangering injuries, because I know they happen. I've seen it. And I think the faster you can get to people and know where they are, you reduce the incidence of death, which I know is one of their biggest concerns in terms of public safety.
No, it definitely is. I actually purchased a Garmin device. It links to Iridium satellites. It's a $400 device that when I do go hike in Rocky Mountain National Park, that I have to activate. Service is quite expensive, but so that is a game changer. I agree with you. The other aspect that I think about is wildlife and forestry management, and the capability to deploy a network, a 5G network, and be able to use drones and these sorts of things to monitor potential hazards with respect to wildfires and this sort of things, and ecology and all of that.
Totally.
That could be a total game changer. I've talked about ag tech on prior podcasts as well. So I think looking beyond Anshel uploading, the videos and of the drone flights and that sort of thing, when you're in the parks, there's some real
they are
practical
banned in
applications.
national parks, by the way.
Well, that's good to hear. but there are definitely some practical applications, like you said, from not only a public safety perspective, but from an ag tech perspective. So, hey, another great conversation this week, buddy. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune in again next week.